Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Tazreen Hussein, Director of Leadership and Social Impact here at Vital Voices. And thank you all for joining us today. We're excited for our discussion where we'll be exploring how we can all ensure climate solutions are informed by and uplift the voices of people from communities affected by climate change the most. You know, as we all know, the climate emergency is imminent and time is incredibly short. People are being directly impacted by climate change, and many communities, Indigenous communities in particular, have been working to address it because they've been disproportionately impacted. You know, unfortunately, it is now well documented that across the globe, women will be disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. I mean, we is right? You know, women across the globe. And that's because of traditional gender roles. You know, when resources become short, the burden falls on women because they are traditionally the ones that are responsible for providing food and items to take care of the household. It's also well documented now that there is an increase in gender-based violence as a result of climate change. And the most recent report from the UN noted that 80% of people displaced by climate are going to be women. Now, those who are in decision-making bodies and at the decision-making table tend to be more men because it reflects our current realities. You know, there are more men in political leadership positions globally, but countries are sending delegations to international climate conferences tend to also be men and mostly made up of men. A recent study found that while men made up 60% of speakers in the main climate discussions, they spoke for 74% of the time. And even going all the way to the science itself, in the latest IPCC report, women made up 32% of the authors. So representation of women from communities disproportionately impacted by climate are even less in all of these fora, and given the existing barriers that exist for women and also the other people with other identities and intersectional identities. Now, at Vital Voices, we know that women are the ones who know their communities, they understand the challenges they face, and they have incredibly bold ideas to address these challenges. So we therefore know that the picture isn't as grim as some of these statistics show. You know, women are on the front lines of this issue, creating solutions across every sector, every community, and every continent. Women entrepreneurs and business leaders are stepping up in sectors like construction, beauty and wellness, technology, and addressing issues such as food waste. Political leaders are introducing bold new legislation to tackle this issue within their governments, working closely with civil society in order to make it all happen. And even survivors of violence, survivors of gender-based violence in particular, are rebuilding their lives and gaining new skills, supporting deforestation efforts in their communities. Young people, young women of color in particular, across the globe are calling on everyone, particularly the adults in the room, for action because they will be the ones bearing the burden of climate change in a few short years. And so I say all this because today's discussion is really a reflection of looking at how, you know, efforts towards addressing climate change, looking at climate solutions need to be inclusive of the voices of the communities and women who are impacted the most. And that's why I'm so excited to introduce you to our panelists today. I wanna introduce you all and give you a bit of their background because these are some rock stars doing amazing work across the globe, and we're thrilled to have them join us. So first, I'm excited to be joined by Hindou Omar, Ibrahim, and Vanessa Nakate. I know this will be a very exciting and fascinating conversation. So by way of background, you know, Hindou is a Chadian environmental activist. She's an advocate for the greater inclusion of Indigenous people and their knowledge and traditions in the global movement to fight the effects of climate change. And she recently received the Pritzker Emerging Environmental Genius Award and was appointed as a United Nations Sustainable Development Goals advocate. Hindou is a part of several advisory committees and groups at the UN working as an advocate, and in 2019 was listed by Time magazine as one of 15 women championing actions on climate change. And we also have Vanessa Nakate, who is a climate activist from Uganda. She was the first Fridays for Future climate activist in Uganda and founder of the Rise Up Climate movement. She spearheaded the campaign to save Congo's rainforest, which is facing massive deforestation. This campaign later spread to other countries from Africa to Europe. And Vanessa has been working on a project that involves installation of solar and institutional stoves in schools. She campaigns internationally to highlight the impacts of climate change already playing out in Africa, and is promoting key climate solutions, including educating girls. Just last year, Vanessa was named a UN Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, was listed as one of BBC 100 Women of the Year and the 100 most influential young Africans, and most recently was awarded the DVF Next Generation Award for her climate activism. So we've got a great, impressive group here with us. Just by way of logistics, I want to let everyone know that we're going to be having our conversation, but there will be time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to include your questions in the chat. Okay, I've talked a lot. Hi, everyone. So good to see you both. I'm really excited to start, diving deep into this conversation. So I want to ask, very first, our theme this morning is on inclusive voices for climate change. It's an important look. It's important to look at women doing the real work on the ground and particularly explore ways that, they have been impacted by climate change, but have been on the front lines of climate activism for years. So it's important to center these voices on the work that you all are doing in order to create, long-term climate solutions. So I want to ask each of you, if you could tell me your defining moment, the moment you knew when your voice was needed to be heard in the fight to end climate crisis. What motivated you to begin your climate activism? And I'll let either one of you, whoever wants to jump in and share your story.
I can jump in first if it's fine. I want to first say that it's always an honor and blessing to listen to Hindou. So I'm so excited to be on this panel with you, Hindou. And thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. There is so much that we are learning from you as activists, specifically me. So I thank you for that. So in 2018, that is when I started to do research about some of the challenges that the people in my community and in my country, Uganda, were facing. And at that point, when I realized that, climate change was one of those challenges, and actually one of the greatest challenges facing the lives of so many people right now, I decided to read more about it and to understand what it really means and, what causes climate change and what are the impacts of climate change. In school, we've all known climate change as being changes in weather patterns over a long period of time, but we haven't had like a reality of what it truly is. And so it is for so many students who are still in school right now. So when I realized that some of these impacts of the climate crisis were already, unfolding in my country, the droughts and the floods and the landslides, they were evident, because I'd had the news about them before, but I couldn't make the connection to climate change. So I felt like I needed to do something about that. I needed to create awareness, and being inspired by, Greta and the climate strikes, I also started, to start striking every Friday. That was in 2019 and the first week of January. So I have been striking every Friday since then, and also just helping organize community reach outs and school reach outs for climate education.
Yeah, hi Tesreen and Leslie, and hi everyone. My younger sister Vanessa, it's so great to be with you and so nice to have this panel in this 2022. And of course, we have to join forces to make action in our continent, in our countries, in our community. And of course, I'm also always admiring what you're doing and counting on you. So my journey started because I'm coming from an indigenous community. And I was very lucky to get a strong mom to send me to school, me and my sister, when we were children. And then it was not accepted at all at the community to allow children to go to school, to the Western school, and particularly the women. And when I went to the city to go to school, I have been marginalized by the other children that calling me like an indigenous girl, that you smiling milk because I'm coming from a pastoral community and all. So being a kids at the school, I didn't realize that why they are just like discriminating me. So then I started to fight for my own rights. And then I understood when I became teenager that I'm very lucky. How about the young girls in my age who do not went to school and who cannot understand how they are getting discriminated? So then I say I have to fight for those girls. And immediately I understood I can't talk about human rights without talking about the environment rights, because my people living and depending from this nature. And then if this nature is not protecting, our life will not be protected. So my journey started when I was growing up, and it is completely my life. It is not like my job. And I used to say that I am born an activist. I didn't become an activist because of the reality of our continents and reality of my community as an indigenous person. And that's why it is very important to link the human rights and environment rights.
Thank you so much. I mean, just hearing you both speak about your motivations, what really resonates with me is that it's really a force from within, right? It's you've seen a wrong in your community, you see the impacts of what's happening in your communities, but you have this drive within you that's almost your purpose that fuels the work that you're doing every day. And that's something I think that a lot of other women resonate with, a lot of other women leaders who feel like they have this conviction to change what's happening in their communities. And that's exactly the type of leadership style that's needed, and one that we recognize here at Vital Voices. So thank you for sharing that, appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, just by way of some quick background, according to the World Bank, climate change is deeply intertwined with global patterns of inequality, particularly some of the examples you all just mentioned in your stories. And that the most vulnerable people bear the brunt of climate change impacts, yet contribute the least to the crisis. As impacts of climate change mount, millions of vulnerable people are facing greater challenges in terms of extreme events, health effects, food security, livelihood, water security, and cultural identity. And many are saying that the communities are doing the most to fight the climate, that these are the communities that are doing the most to fight the climate crisis. Can you share with us what practices each of you have seen in your own communities in this fight? So what are some community level actions that you've seen within your experience?
Yeah, like, what you've talked about, some of, the inequalities that are exacerbated by the climate crisis, and how those who are least responsible are suffering some of the worst impacts of climate change, giving the example of the African continent, which historically is responsible for less than 4% of global emissions. But when you look at, how much the climate crisis is affecting many people in Africa, we've seen, disasters like cyclones, flooding, landslides, destroying people's homes, destroying people's businesses, destroying people's families. So this is, one of the horrible realities of the climate crisis. And this is what makes it, a climate injustice, that those who are least responsible, they are the ones suffering, some of the most terrible and brutal impacts of climate change. However, the people in these communities are not silent. We are not silent, because we see this injustice and we address it and ask for change and ask for justice. I have seen it, in my community. I've seen it in different communities, in the African continent, with young people rising up and using their voices and using their platforms to demand for change through organizing and mobilizing climate strikes, through running projects in their communities. We've seen young people in the African continent work to provide water for their communities, to put in place water harvesting mechanisms for their communities, so that in case of dry spells and water scarcity, their communities can have access to water. We've seen, young people in Africa teach children about climate climate issues and involving children in the climate conversation, teaching them how to grow and how to plant and grow trees as well, especially fruit trees. I have seen it here in Uganda as well. I have seen my fellow activist. She started a project. It's called One Tree Project. Her name is Evelyn Acham, and she goes to households. We go to households with her, and she plants fruit trees in these households so that they can be a source of food and also, to protect the environment as well. So the young people, on the African continent are doing different things that are transforming their communities. We also have the Vash Green Schools project, which I started, and we do installations of solar panels in schools and eco-friendly cookstoves in schools. So there is visible change that is happening in our communities, and this change is being driven by the young people.
Yeah, thank you for what you are doing, Sister Vanessa. And of course, you are the one who are showing all the young African, it is possible to do it, and we are very proud of you. And of course, to add to what Vanessa said, last year, our regions faced a big flood. Even in the cities like Niamey, Khartoum, N'Djamena, my city home, and all got under flood. People cannot just walk, they have to use a canoe inside the city. And this year, there is not enough rain. And then most of the crops are just like dried up. And this is what we are experiencing from one day to another one. And that's why our region are facing the food insecurity and all this climate injustice. It's coming to us with the impact in our community. But however, as we said, we are not giving up. We are acting. And community are acting even without the technology or access to electricity, but they are acting. I give you some of the examples that I did. So for the first time, we did a project with Indigenous women. And this project ended up by giving them a land titling for the first time, because the land titling for women in Africa, it is not the one who can work, all the land are for man. So this project was just to talk with the women, organize them as a group, negotiate with a community leaders as man, and telling them, if you want to have your life change, you must help the women at the community. And the first thing we want, you have to give them a piece of land. And then they all agree to give the piece of land. And surprise for them, we come up and say, we have a paper we wanted you to sign on, because we can't agree in verbal, because as African, we used to be verbal peoples. And then this document was signed by 3 community chiefs, and then we send it to the local administration. The local authorities also signed the document. And finally, we have this land titling to the women. And they are going to do an agroecology based on the traditional knowledge, not pesticide, nothing, how they can use their own knowledge to grow up crops, have the income revenue, and also restore the ecosystem, because it is around a national park. Because most of the time, the national park, they say it is safe, but it is not completely biodiverse. So the community know how to keep this balance. And we put the community as the guardian of this part of the national park to restore it. The second project that we are doing, I just finished it 3 weeks ago. It is around the 2D participatory mapping. And one day, Vanessa, my sister, I will love that you come in the mapping that I'm doing, because it can inspire many other African peoples and even not African peoples. So the 2D participatory mapping, it is based on the science knowledge, technology, and traditional knowledge. So I use a satellite map. That map over 2,000 kilometers square of community land. And we start with 24 communities that come to put all the knowledge there. The knowledge are better than the satellite map for 1,000%. And then when they start putting the knowledge, we ended up with more than 100 communities. And when I say 100 communities, it is 100 villages with the community chiefs and with all the communities. that come and then they put all the knowledge there. Our final work on this, it is to digitalize this map, and then it's help the community to do a convention between them to better share and manage the natural resources, to better mitigate the conflict over the resources, because this is what is happening around all the regions because of the lack of the resources. And then it can help them to translate the knowledge from one generation to another one, not just in oral, but they can keep it in the written piece in a traditional language. So African people are acting to respond, even we are the most impacted.
You know, I so appreciate you bringing this last example up, Hindou. I've read a lot about your work and what you've said about it. And one of the things that you've said is that you've called this process, in particular, an empowering one for women. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Right. So, you know, women statute is not recognized at its could be recognized. That's everywhere in the world. And when you come to Africa, it's more worse. And when you come to some of the communities, you have cultural barriers, you have religious barriers. And at the end, it is always the man that take the decisions. So we use this culture and traditions to work it in a positive way to increase the women participations. So how we do it, when we do the mapping, participatory mapping, the community chief is coming front and they are so happy because they are taking the lead, taking the decision. We let them do it. They put all the bigger repair, like the rivers, the mountain, the bigger forest and all. And then we ask them, you done? They are like very proud of themselves, they done. And then at the end we say like, okay, so we can call the woman. They say like, yes, you can call the woman because like they did the work. And when the women start coming, they start putting the detailed knowledge that the man do not know. So then at the end, the map becomes very rich, and then they see the discussion of the women. And at the end of the day, we just ask the man, what do you think about what the woman doing? And they just shut up, say like, they are right. They are right. And then at the end, the women feel empowered, and we start the discussion telling them the women need to sit here with you and discuss the map and take the decision because they know better the future. You are the one who are responding to climate change by running away when it is hard, because you are going to the big city to look for the job. But those women who stay at the community forever, they know better than you. So that's how we do it.
You know, I appreciate your perspective here. And you are really, you know, creating a lot of impact on the ground in terms of gender dynamics as well as the issue at hand. And I think you're showing how by including women in that process, everyone benefits. So I appreciate your experience there. Vanessa, can you tell us about the Rise Up Climate movement? You know, what is the work you're doing there and what has the impact been so far?
Yeah, thank you. The Rise Up movement, it's a movement that, you know, started in 2019. I remember in 2019, later on, after I had started my climate strikes, I started to speak to my friends I had gone to school with about the climate strikes and the climate movement, and asking them to join the movement. But if many people remember at that time, media would report about the movement as one led by teenagers and only for teenagers. And myself and, you know, my fellow classmates who were just finishing university, so we were like 2021. So many of them were feeling like they wouldn't be a part, they wouldn't feel like they could fit in the movement. And I asked them if we could call ourselves Youth for Future. So we still organize strikes on Friday, but we can call ourselves Youth for Future. And when we agreed on that, many of them started to come on board and also, you know, join the organizing and also going to the schools. But then later on, we changed the name to Rise Up Movement. So Rise Up Movement is birthed from Youth for Future, a Youth for Future group with my, you know, fellow classmates from university. And what we do as Rise Up, one of the things is to, you know, help organize and mobilize climate strikes. And also the other thing, it is to help amplify voices of different activists, especially in the African continent, because we've seen some of the challenges that many African activists face when it comes to being heard and being listened to or attending certain, you know, conferences. So in Rise Up Movement, we try to create a platform where we share the work of the different activists through, 1 million activist stories. We also try to, see if we can find interview requests for activists or opportunities for application to attend certain climate conferences, so that more activists can have their voices listened to and also amplified. We believe that every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. And we also believe that the climate movement doesn't have just one face or two faces or three faces. The climate movement has so many faces, and it doesn't make sense for people to keep saying we want this, we want the same face, we want the same face, but then there are more activists, there are more people working and speaking on the ground. So we are working to try and make sure that different activists have their voices really amplified when it comes to the climate spaces. And we also have a number of projects that run under Rise Up movement. One that I already talked about, of installing solar panels and eco-friendly cookstoves in schools to help drive this transition to renewable energy, and also for schools to have an alternative that will reduce on the firewood that is used in preparation of food for the students. And there is also the other project I talked about, led by one of us, Evelyn, and the one of planting fruit trees in people's households. That is also another project that we've really been working on as Rise Up movement. And then another one that is led by another activist, his name is Isaac. And in this project, it's called Girl on the Move project. So it's more of skill empowering girls and young women through skills development, because we believe that education of girls and women empowerment is also one of the ways that we can tackle the climate crisis. And the other thing that we really work strongly on is climate education. This is in communities and also within schools.
Listening to you speak and hearing about the impact that you've been able to make through this, it seems like the movement itself is very inclusive, and you rely on storytelling and experience sharing, really, to share these lessons learned and motivate one another and inspire one another. And I think that's so powerful in and of itself. And you've almost created like a knowledge warehouse of things that are working within communities, and the leaders and the people that are leading the way to do that. So it's such an incredibly powerful initiative. And I'm so happy to hear that it exists for folks like you and folks across the world to really share their stories. I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about your experience in the international forums. And so particularly conducting advocacy and providing your expertise in the international arena more broadly. So one of the things that we hear a lot about in this space, specifically when looking at gender equity, is the recognition that women need to be at the decision-making table, right? You have both successfully made your way there, but I assume that it wasn't an easy or straightforward path. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to this decision-making table or these international conferences? And can you tell us about, just your experience overall, if you've experienced any barriers and how you were able to work through them? I don't know, Hindou, if you want to start first.
Sure. I think it's a difficult part, because being a woman and being at the international negotiations, so you are really marginalized in so different way. So firstly, if you are a woman. Second, you are a woman of color. You are young. You are indigenous. Like, you get all the power of you can be in the tables. Like, what you are saying, it's not interesting or it's not matter. So that was the first experience. And then people do not open the place and welcome you. No, you have to make your way. And I fight to be there. And I fight by a lot of consequences that I had without non-sleeping. You have to give the proof every time. So I just share with you the examples of my first time being in the climate negotiation, and then I get the chance to be in the room with the negotiators, and then they say like, okay, then let's give the voice to Hindou. And then I get the mic, I explain the history, I explain the reality of what is happening, and all of them, most of them, I can say 95% are white man with the black suit, white old man. And then there are some female, but they're not the one who are sitting at the table to take the decisions. And then they just like sit and listen to me, check them head, and at the end, they move up to the business as usual. I feel so frustrated. And I ask myself why I am here and what are they doing? Because if they're taking the right decisions, they must listen to what I'm saying, because I'm the one who knows what is happening on the ground and what can change their own decision and where the decision can be implemented. So that made me so sad and so mad on me. And then when I come back to another opportunity, so I make my voice. At the end, when they start talking to the business as usual, I took over the mic back and telling them, you are not listening to me. And they get shocked. All of them get really shocked. They're like, oh my God, who is she? Why she's doing that without respecting the protocol? I'm not here to respect your protocols or your rules or whatever. You must listen to what I say. Did you hear me? Why you are continuously saying that or doing that? And then I'm start just like checking. I get so mad and I'm crying. And like, you do not know what's happening on the ground. You are creating all the messes and you're not listening. And then at the end of the day, they just all shut up. And then they change the way of speaking. And then they start speaking in different way. And at the end, you know, like people approach you and they'll say like, oh, we hear you, don't feel bad, don't feel mad. So that was one of the experience. And another experience to just like come in the tables and sit there, I have to start by having other Indigenous peoples coming with me. And then we come there as a team and we stay there all together. When you look at the climate negotiation statement of Indigenous peoples, when someone is giving the statement, we all who are getting the chance to get in the room, we stand up behind to make the room feel that this person is speaking, but it's not alone. This person is with us and we are all behind and supporting. And then at the end of the day, they have no other choice to just like listen. So it's very hard, but you have to prove yourself every single day. This is the one who is most tiring. And I assume, Vanessa, you did also have with some of the use during the climate negotiation.
Yeah, I'm just sorry about that, but then like I'm just so inspired by your power and your strength, to demand for your space and to demand to be listened to. I think that is really so powerful. And to just think about also some of the experiences that I have had as a young woman in the climate space, especially when I had just studied activism. I remember some of the really horrible comments that started coming in at that time when I had started activism was one that I should get married, and because apparently I was on the streets so that I can attract some man somewhere, basing on what the person was saying. So those are, I think that is one of the challenges that I saw when I studied activism, for people to think that standing on the streets is me looking for, a certain kind of attention, especially from men, and being told that, taking drugs and all that stuff. So I think many young women face many of these challenges, especially when they come out to speak on certain issues. Sometimes it can be, online attacks or even physical attacks. We've seen, so many women experience, abuse on social media, attacks on social media because of the work that they're doing. And I'm certain that more women experience, social media trolling and abuse than men, if the calculations are to be made. But one of the things that has really kept me in my activism and to really ignore many of those things is, the vision, like why I started in the first place, why I started, to strike in the first place. And if I haven't seen, the manifestation of that vision when I had started, then that should be, the thing that keeps me going. And to also know that I'm not the only woman out there speaking up. There's so many out there who are organizing in their communities. There's so many who are inspiring us, like Hindou, so when we look at those who have gone ahead of us and we see the strength and the power that they hold, and to see that they haven't given up, that is also an inspiration for us to keep demanding for climate justice. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing your experience there. It seems like changing the rules, right? Changing the rules, doing things in ways where you feel your voice is heard is exactly what's needed. And it also sounds like you were both relying on your community, your people, others like you, to really stand in solidarity. And so creating those connections and fostering those relationships is just as important in order to get this work done and really ensure your voice is heard. So I appreciate your sharing your experiences and your vulnerabilities with this, because we know it's not an easy task at hand. I have one more question, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. Vanessa, this is particularly for you, because I want to take a look at the role that the media plays here. In 2020, there was a picture taken by the Associated Press of 4 young climate activists at Davos, including Greta Thunberg. The photo quickly went viral because, as it turns out, the only activist of color, a young activist from Uganda, was cut out of the picture. Now, that activist was you, Vanessa, and when this came to light, there was a huge outcry, and because there is a clear visual of how the experiences of people of color and those from the global South are left out. I mean, since then, the AP has apologized, but it quickly got the conversation going, and I would argue that conversation is still happening to this day. So Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit about how you felt when this happened and what you hope the media was able to take away from this experience? And you do speak about this in your experience in your own book, which is called A Bigger Picture, My Fight to Bring a New African Voice to the Climate Crisis. But I'd love to hear from you now, especially if you have any further reflections, particularly on the responsibility of the media when it comes to reporting on these issues and for people who are disproportionately impacted by the climate emergency.
Yeah, well, for me, it was, of course, a frustrating experience, to see that happen. But one thing that I remember, I started to read more about, after that incident, to read more about, the intersection of climate, justice and racial justice, because at that point, that was, the very first time that I felt I experienced something close to, or what I would call racism. So I started to, to ask myself, what the connection is. Of course, I knew that those who are most impacted, they are least responsible, and many of them are from the African continent. But then I wanted to just get a deeper understanding of the intersection of racial justice and climate justice. And, it's really mind-blowing when you get to understand how, we can't have, climate justice without racial justice, because many communities, many people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis, many times you find that they're Black communities, or people of color, not just on the African continent, but even in the United States, even in Europe, even in the UK, you find that residences of people of color, they are exposed to air pollution, they're exposed to, landfills, they're exposed to coal-fired power plants. So we realize that, there is a historical issue that shows how much Black communities are in the areas that are more prone, to climate disasters. And, you even go beyond the impacts and how they disproportionately affect, people of color, but you also start to think about who is listened to, in some of these spaces. Like Hind was talked about some of the challenges when you're a woman, and a young woman, and a woman of color, and an Indigenous woman. Like it gets even more complicated to have your voice really listened to. So it goes from the impacts and how they disproportionately affect our communities, but also how we are being listened to or amplified. The African continent, while it's on the front lines of the climate crisis, it is not on the front pages of the world's newspapers. And we've seen African activists, struggle to have their voices listened to and amplified and platformed. Just with the previous COP26, I saw, my friends and fellow activists from some African countries who couldn't travel because they couldn't access, vaccination. And why? Vaccine inequity. They couldn't access accreditation or funding. So again, these are, immediate inequalities, that show the racial injustices, that are evident when we are fighting for, climate justice. So these are, I think, some of the, it's a very broad issue, but these are some of the things that I can talk about when it comes to racial justice and climate justice. And, to also think about some of the solutions, climate solutions that we see that are being, talked about. Again, climate solutions, not all climate solutions are actually climate justice, and that is very hard for some people to take in. For example, you see a corporation, talk about tree planting campaigns, but that could mean indigenous land somewhere is going to be grabbed, indigenous communities somewhere are going to be exploited, so that corporation shows that it is planting trees. So that, still, tree planting is good, but if it means that indigenous communities are going to lose their land, that is not climate justice. When we talk about electric vehicles and we see how, some of the material needed for manufacturing of electric vehicles, it means certain women and children in a certain area on the African continent are going to be more exploited, to work hard and get these minerals so that someone in the global north can drive an electric vehicle. So I think when you look at some of these things, you start to also question some of the climate solutions, they are not inclusive enough. So I think when we talk about racial justice, it goes from who is being listened to, it goes from who is being impacted, and it goes to these solutions, who is benefiting from them and who is getting harmed by these solutions. And for people to know that, we can't have climate justice without racial justice. And the role of the media has a huge responsibility to amplify the voices of activists from the most affected areas and to talk about the realities of the climate crisis with an urgency of what is happening now. Many times we see, 1.5 being, talked about as the ultimate survival for communities. But then we forget to understand that even at 1.2 degrees, many communities in Africa are already suffering some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. So we realize that, okay, even 1.5, it is not as safe as, everyone talks about it, that even 1.2, we are still seeing cyclones ripping apart large parts of the African continent. We are seeing droughts leaving millions of people with no access to food. We saw the Eastern African drought that left more than 26 million people with no access to food, leaving animals to die. So I think when we are to talk about the issue of race and climate, it could take a longer time, but it's a very wide conversation. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that perspective because it just shows that it's very nuanced and there is actually a lot more to uncover beyond the headlines, and a lot more information that needs to be shared in a more nuanced way. So, I completely hear what you're saying and completely get it. So we want to now open it up to questions for the audience. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat. We received one question where they've asked, how can global advocates and funders better support your work to strengthen this climate justice movement? I don't know if Hindou, maybe you want to start us off.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. And just Vanessa, I wanted to tell you firstly, I was in Davos when this happened. I feel very, very mad. I feel like it's myself and why it's happening now. And don't worry, it's happened also to the Indigenous youth in the COP25. And I did call it a meeting with the UN Secretariat, and we make a cases after the COP with all the UN police because they kicked out an Indigenous youth when there was all the rest of the other youth activists to come. So it's happened, but we will never give up because of just excluding peoples, okay? Coming back to the questions, I think people can do a lot. They can do in their own way and capacity. So firstly, supporting the project that we are doing on the ground, the action project that can change the life of communities. This is very, very important because of course, speaking is important, but we don't have time to speak. We wanted to have action and we wanted to show our leadership by leading this fight of climate change. So if anyone from the funders, from the activists, others can support the project that we are doing for the community, that can help them to do an impact for climate positive and also for changing the life of peoples. Secondly, communication is very important. We see just what Vanessa said and all what we are doing. We want to communicate that to the world because we are not the victim. Of course, we are coming from vulnerable communities and vulnerable continent and all, but we wanted to show that we are not the victim. We are the solutions. We are acting. We are there to share, to help others. And I think fighting climate change is sharing the experiences with each other. It doesn't matter developed or developing country, we need to share this experience. So make our voices out, share what we are doing with others. And then finally, support the participation in the voices of all of us. There are so many fellow of us that are doing incredible things. And as Vanessa said also, the participation is very limited. Accreditation access, visa access, or funding mechanism access to participate, to have the voices there during the negotiation, as much as you have the numbers, as much as you have the influence there. That's what we all learn. So support that. And of course, you have the power to vote for the right peoples. Do it. When we say voting, it is not only voting for the presidential. Of course, it is very important because one mandate without action can blame all what we are doing on climate. So we can't wait for the one mandate, but vote also for a right parliamentarian, for a right senators, because all the level of power count. So please make your voice and help the others to also make the right choice. Make a right choice in everything. It's matter. So we really need your help.
Yeah, I really agree with Hindou, and I think I also, it's literally the same thing. Just support the work of activists, the projects, and amplifying their voices in any way that you can. I can maybe specifically talk about, the COP27 that is going to be in Egypt on African soil and African land this year. And again, one of the things that I've really been thinking about is for us not to face the same challenges of ensuring that African activists can be able to go to the conference. So, like Hina has talked about issues of accreditation or visa or funding. I think this would be one of the ways that anyone or any funder out there would support different African activists to be able to go to the COP in Egypt. It wouldn't make, it would be so weird and unfortunate for the COP to be in Africa and to have more white people at the COP than African people, especially African organizers. So I think that is one of the things that, just to add on what Hinu talked about, that funders can think about, to help fund activists, to go to the COP27 in Egypt.
I really do appreciate what you're saying here because these are very practical solutions, right? Very practical asks that don't require, big program design. It's very easy because there are activists already on the ground that know what they're doing, that know what they're talking about. They just need to be able to get to these places and have their voices heard. And I think that's powerful, right? I think there's a lot that can be done with that, but donors need to know that that's how that they can support. So, it's a very practical way, and I hope people are listening on the call and during this session that there are practical ways of supporting these efforts. We got another question And maybe Vanessa, you can touch on this a bit more with your work with young girls and in schools. But we have someone asking, you know, how can we educate more youth on climate change from a primary education?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I can give an experience. Yesterday, I was with fellow activists at a certain school in my country, Uganda, and we were doing a form of climate education and just talking about the work that we do and why we do it, and then, you know, letting the students ask the questions. But then we spoke to, you know, different classes or different grades, you know, and so we're meeting different age groups of the students. And I can first of all give an example. There are students we met who were like 7, 8, or 9, and we were also talking about the work, you know, that we do, and they were asking questions. And I remember one of the questions that one student asked was, you know, what they can do for the environment as well. Around 8 years, asking what they can do. And I remember asking, you know, asking the student if they had a water bottle, and they said yes, they did, and they carry it every day for school. And I'm like, yes, you're already doing something, you know, for the environment by carrying that water bottle. It means that you're not using plastic. It also means that you're saving millions of fish from taking in plastic that ends up in, you know, in our lakes, in our oceans. So at that young age, the student can easily, or the child can easily get that because of the water bottle, they're doing something. They're protecting fish somewhere, they're protecting animals somewhere, you know, and they grow up with this thing of just the small action is actually transforming this world. But as that child continues to grow, they get to learn more of that, you know, the deeper issues when it comes to, you know, the climate disasters, you know, the climate crisis, because you can't tell, you know, an 8-year-old that we are facing the worst disasters, you know, when it comes to the climate, you know, that can be quite breaking and even depressing. But you can tell them that just that water bottle that they're using is actually doing something. But then that is not the same way that we will speak to maybe a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old who will ask a question about the work that we are doing. So my experience that I've seen in schools is that, you know, you will find actually the younger students always ask the most intriguing questions. Grade 4, grade 5, they always ask the most intriguing question. And I always find that the way we answer the younger students is not the same way that we answer. Now, a 16-year-old, I would tell him or her to maybe use their social media to talk about climate issues, or to join a climate strike, or to start a climate club, you know, in their schools, an environmental club, which I would not tell an 8-year-old. So I think if I don't know if that really answers, but that's one of the ways that we've been able to relate with students of, you know, different ages in schools.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, sometimes the simplest questions can be the most profound. And even the way you respond and making it a very tangible way, I think, I'm going to be honest with you, even for adults, sometimes we need to hear that and know that that's the way to make a difference, and that you're actually are doing something in the long run. We have one more question from Lara Ayu, who have asked, you know, have you developed and I'll add here, or do you know of any watchdog organizations to hold officials accountable? And if so, how were you able to initiate it? I don't know, Hindou, if this is something that you may have some insight on, given the work you've done representing civil society.
Yeah, so holding them accountable as government, we do that, of course, at the international level, but we do that also at the local level. So one of my experience was starting to go slowly, because one day they just ask a group of my community that used to go through the river with the cattle to drink, and they just say like, you have no right anymore to go to the river. So just like a decision from government. And starting affecting the life of the peoples because there was no clean water to drink. Peoples are drinking all from the river and even the cattle, and then they starting to become ill. And then I sent a letter to the ministries. I asked them what is happening. They have to just cancel this decision because it is against the right of the peoples. And then they say like, oh, it is not from our side. It is from the more higher level than the ministerial. So then I'm like, okay, just to tell us that you are going to take our case there. We give them 1 week, nothing happened. So after the 1 week, I went directly to a radio show. I asked them, I wanted to speak right now. They're like, what's happening? I'm like, there is a case that's going on and you are here as media, you must give me this mic now. And then they agree. I get the mic and then I explain what is happening exactly at the community. And then the government is enacting in this way and harming the life of the communities. And then surprisingly, the next day, they took a decision to cancel the one they had to ask the community to do not go back. And until today, they never come back to these decisions. So I think from this experience, holding the local authorities or national government accountables can work, but you need to have a strong strategy. You have to pass through a media sometime, through a higher level person, if it is not higher than that one, another time. But of course, I wanted also to go directly to the other question related to this one on if we get harassed or pressures by the government. Of course, also, I can give you the examples of myself. It was some years ago, but I get harassed by sending some generals, like 3 generals, they send them home. And when you are in this situation, sorry, I'm getting so emotional about that, you can't tell it to your family because I don't want it to get my mom and father in the problem because I am the one who's doing the activism and I'm doing that on the name of the communities. But so what I did, I just like crossed the river because when you cross the river, you are in Cameroon. So I crossed the river to Cameroon. I stayed over for 1 week. And at the end, I say like, it is not a solution. You can't run away from the problem. You must resolve it. And no one taught me nothing. And I just like, come back myself. And then I went directly asked a meeting at the French embassy, next hour in the US embassy, and then into the EU office. I know some friends there. I went there to have a meeting there, and I show the government peoples outside that I don't know who wanted to oppress me, that I just get in here, out here, in here, out here. So at the end of the day, so be cautious. Everyone is informed about you harassing me. So it's work by magic. So you need any strategy if you are doing something and you're getting oppressed to show them that peoples are aware about what they are doing that can help you sometime to get protected and sometime not. Because my final example on this one, it is very sad to see just a 12 years old David, an indigenous boy from Colombia that get it killed because he went outside for like Friday for Future. So just that he get killed completely. So some government can get oppress you until kill you, and others maybe can get scared. It is the risk that we are taking, but I think like I will never give up because just they oppress me or whatever. If it's not me, then who? We have to do it.
You know, I appreciate you sharing that with this Hindou and being vulnerable. I mean, it's definitely the work that you're doing can come at a cost and does come at a cost, and it's something that also needs to be recognized as well. I mean, personal security more broadly is also more needed. And I would actually say, going back to that funder question, you know, thinking about that as an avenue as well to help support. So I want to ask one final question before we wrap up. And I'm going to take my privilege here, being from Vital Voices, We have an incredible global network of over 18,000 women leaders across the globe. And this issue, supporting climate leaders like you, addressing the climate emergency and really amplifying incredible climate solutions is something that there is so much of a need for, and that this network is really galvanizing to do. So my question to the both of you, and then we can wrap up here, is, what are the ways that the Vital Voices network of over 18,000 women leaders across the world and across sectors, how can we support you in the work that you're doing and the work that others like you are doing to center the voices of women disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that, I can first say one of the ways that you're supporting is to have us on this panel. I think that is, one of the ways, to platform and amplify our voices, our stories, and our experiences. I think that is really important. So that is something that I would like, Vital Voices to keep doing, to amplify as many voices as possible in this fight for climate justice, especially young women, who face so many challenges, while they're in the climate or in the environmental movement. And I think one of the other ways would be, things that we've already talked about. This could be support on resources. This could be financial resources on projects. This could be legal resources, like the issue with security. I think, those are some of the ways, and to just, keep using your platform to amplify as many stories and as many voices as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with what my younger sister Vanessa said here. We need you to amplify our voices, to make our history hearing by everyone and support us. In addition, we need the big network to put us all in connection, to network peoples, to network women, to make our voices a global voices, not only like one person is speaking, then these voices are supported. But I think a concrete ask also to the Vital Voice can do, and maybe some organization can do. Like I run my community organization, non-profit community organization. It is not an NGO, because community refused that it's become an NGO. NGO need to have a fixed objective. And while climate, environment, and rights are always changing and moving, so they keep it to the community-based organization. But it is so hard to find that an organization who support and staff members that can work. And then it is very hard to do not found a communities who didn't get the chance to go to school. Like, I'm here to do the panels, I'm here to write a proposal, I'm here to report back, to manage the finance, to do that. At the end of the day, you say like, no, it is not efficient. So you need to be focused. So how you can help network us, and I assume that I talk on your behalf also, my sister Vanessa, it is the same, because I know the organization in Africa, how they can help us to get these structures more organized and more help to do the implementation work. And then, of course, we have the people that we can train to do more advocacy, and we can have more voices. So this concrete ask, if you can link it with other people's, it will be really helpful, because we wanted to have action. I repeat, really, again, we wanted to have this action. We have 8 years by 2030. And we wanted to show that the women voices can change the world, and all the women can come together, show them the result. We can't show them the talk as they used to do themselves. We wanted to show them the action on the ground.
Hindou and Vanessa, thank you so much for taking time out today from the incredible work that you're doing to speak with us, for giving us some easy, tangible takeaways, and for sharing your experience and being vulnerable. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look in the chat, but a lot of your your colleagues and other women leaders who are on this call are sharing so many messages of support and encouraging you. And that just really in turn encourages all of us. So once again, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you being here. And this won't be the first or the last. There's going to be many more of these conversations, and we look forward to continuing this work with you. And thank you all for everyone joining us. We appreciate you being here and taking time out in your morning, and we hope to have more. Thank you all. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.